10 years ago, my family's group chat had a nickname for me: the disappointment. Last month, my face was on the cover of Forbes. I didn't send the magazine to anyone. I didn't post about it. I let 10 years of silence build up between us, and I waited for the one dinner where I knew every single person who'd ever called me a disappointment would be sitting at the same table. "Are you still doing that computer thing?" My uncle asked the same question he'd asked every Thanksgiving for a decade, already half turned away before I could answer. I reached into my bag and set the magazine face up on the table, right next to the mashed potatoes. Nobody asked about the computer thing again after that. Welcome to Revenge Stories Narrated, where family betrayal meets inevitable justice and karma always collects its debt. My name is Adriana Whitlock. I'm 32. I'm the youngest of 3 children, and for most of my life, I was the sibling nobody expected much from. My sister Brooke became a doctor by 26. My brother Connor became a partner at a law firm before 30. I dropped out of college at 21 to work on a piece of software nobody in my family understood or respected, and for a decade, that decision followed me into every holiday, every group chat, every family dinner, like a shadow I couldn't shake. My parents had paid for 2 years of a business degree before I left, and my father brought that up more than once over the following years, usually somewhere between the appetizer and the main course. I didn't know, sitting through those dinners year after year, how close I actually was to the thing that would finally change everything, since building something real in the dark rarely looks impressive from the outside while it's happening. It started small enough that I told myself it didn't matter. At my cousin's wedding 6 years ago, my aunt introduced me to a table of relatives as the one who's still figuring things out, while Brooke and Connor got full titles attached to their names. I laughed it off that night, the way I always did, and went home and worked until 3 in the morning on a version of my software that still barely functioned. I remember sitting in my apartment that night, watching lines of broken code scroll past on my screen, wondering if my aunt might actually be right about me. 2 years after that, at a family dinner where I'd finally managed to land my first real client contract, worth a modest $12,000, I tried to share the news. My father cut me off within a minute, turning the conversation back to Connor's recent promotion, and I remember sitting there, watching my small win disappear into the background noise of someone else's bigger one, not for the first time. $12,000 felt enormous to me that year, enough to cover 3 more months of rent and server costs, and I never once got the chance to say so out loud at that table. I lost real things during those years, things that mattered more than money. I stopped bringing dates to family events since I didn't want anyone hearing the running joke about my career before they even got to know me. I missed my own college roommate's wedding to work through a critical product launch weekend, since I was terrified of losing momentum on something my own family had never once taken seriously. I stopped calling my mother as often too, not out of anger exactly, just exhaustion from constantly bracing for the next comment about when I'd get a real job. Even small talk with her started to feel like a test I was quietly failing every single week, so I let the calls get shorter, then less frequent, until we were down to a handful of minutes every other Sunday. The exact moment I decided to disappear from all of it came at a Christmas dinner 8 years ago, when my grandmother, gently but pointedly, asked if I'd considered just getting a stable job somewhere for your own sake. I said nothing that night. I simply decided, quietly, driving home in the dark, that I would stop explaining myself to people who'd already decided who I was. If you've ever built something real while the people closest to you assumed you were failing, tell me in the comments, because I want to know I'm not the only one who's lived through that. I pulled back from the family after that Christmas, showing up only to the events I couldn't reasonably skip, saying less and less about my work every time someone asked. What none of them knew was that my software, a logistics platform designed to help small manufacturers cut shipping costs, had quietly landed a partnership with a mid-sized regional distributor that same year, the first real proof the idea actually worked at scale. I told exactly 2 people outside the company, my college roommate and a former professor who'd quietly mentored me, since I'd learned by then that sharing good news with my family only ever seemed to shrink it. The next 3 years were the hardest of my life, in ways I never once described to my family. I nearly ran out of funding twice, once coming within 11 days of having to shut everything down entirely, saved only by a last-minute investor meeting I'd almost canceled out of exhaustion. I worked 18-hour days more often than not, missing birthdays, missing holidays, sending a generic text instead of showing up, letting my family's assumptions about me do the work of explaining my absence, so I wouldn't have to. By the third year, the platform had expanded into 3 countries, processing logistics for over 400 manufacturing clients, and quietly reshaping how a piece of an entire industry moved goods across borders. Tech journalists started calling. Investors I'd once begged for meetings started calling me instead. I remember sitting in my old apartment, the same one where I'd once questioned whether my aunt had been right about me, reading an email from a fund that had rejected me twice in earlier years, now asking to schedule a call at my convenience. The Forbes call came on an ordinary Tuesday, informing me I'd been selected for their 30 Under 30 Hall of Fame feature, a milestone reserved for people who'd built something that had genuinely reshaped their industry, not just performed well for a single good year. I didn't tell my family before the issue came out. I let it sit on newsstands for 3 full weeks, and I waited for the family dinner I already knew was coming, the same traditional Sunday gathering my family had hosted every month for as long as I could remember. I walked in that Sunday, magazine in my bag, and let the small talk happen exactly the way it always did. "Any luck finding something steadier this year?" my aunt asked, the same tone she always used, equal parts pity and mild embarrassment on my behalf. "Actually," I said, "I think I finally found my footing." I reached into my bag and set the magazine on the table. The room went quiet in a way I'd never once heard at that table before. My uncle picked it up first, read the cover twice, then looked up at me like he was seeing me for the first time in a decade. "This is you," he said. Not a question. A statement he clearly couldn't believe was true. "That's me," I said. The one still figuring things out. I addressed each of them plainly, without raising my voice. I reminded my aunt of the wedding introduction, my father of the dinner where he changed the subject on my first client win, my grandmother of the Christmas comment about a real job. I laid out, calmly, exactly what the company had built, the 400 clients, the 3 countries, the industry partnerships now bearing my name in trade publications they'd never once bothered reading. My father, visibly shaken, tried to pivot almost immediately. "We're so proud of you, sweetheart," he said. "Family always believed in you." "You changed the subject the last time I tried to tell you about this," I said. I remember exactly what family belief sounded like back then. Connor, recovering faster than the others, leaned forward with a different kind of interest entirely. "Listen, if you ever need someone with legal experience on the team, or if there's an investment opportunity here," he started. "There isn't," I said. "Not for family." The same dismissal my family used for a decade, treating my work as something not worth their time or belief, became the exact thing that shut the door when they finally wanted access to it. I didn't storm out that night. I stayed for coffee, answered a few more questions politely, and left on my own terms, the same way I'd built everything else over the past 10 years, quietly and completely on my own schedule. I still see my family occasionally now, at the events that genuinely matter, though I've kept a clear boundary around the business itself. Brooke, to her credit, reached out privately a few weeks after that dinner, admitting she'd never once asked me a real question about my work in 10 years, and asked if she could take me to dinner sometime, just the 2 of us, no group chat involved. My mother calls more often these days, and I've let some of that back in, since she was never quite as sharp with her comments as the others. The rest of the family gets exactly as much access to my life as they earned during the years they assumed I had none worth watching. The company has grown by another 60% since that dinner, expanding into 2 new markets this year alone, and I finally hired a small team to handle client relationships, something I used to do entirely alone during those first exhausting years. I don't need the magazine cover anymore to know what I built. I needed it once, to finally close a door that had been left open far too long. 10 years ago, my family's group chat had a nickname for me. Last month, my face was on the cover of Forbes, sitting quietly on a dinner table, saying more than I ever needed to. If you've ever had to quietly prove your worth instead of arguing for it, you already know it works better that way. Subscribe if you want more stories like this one, and tell me down below what you would have done the moment you set that magazine on the table.